Hello there. I think I'm still padded. Yes. Well, hello there.
Yes, that's better.
Hi there, John.
Hi, Ben. How are you this fine evening?
I am about 80% better than I was yesterday. And yesterday, if for those of you who watched yesterday's show, I had my shoulder had been out in the daytime, gone back in mostly, and I was trapping a nerve. And I was trying to get through
Who
it.
Who is this handsome man we have?
Oh, I was going to get you to introduce our guest, John.
I thought you normally introduced the guests on After Dark, but
yes, yes, I know, but I thought I'd give you the honour.
Yes, we would love to welcome back again for the third time for me, second for Ben, formerly on Chasing Liberty, and last year on Chasing Dissent After Dark, the one, the only, Mark Changizi from Columbus, Ohio, and his Science Moments show on YouTube, which is now well into the, nearly 200? Yeah?
Nearly 200, yep. Glad to be here.
Yep.
Welcome back, man. How are you?
Oh, good. Very good.
It's been almost a year since we last spoke. It's been a while. You were actually one of our first ever guests, and we've done guests pretty much every week since. So it's good to get back to, shall we say, our roots when it comes to having guests.
Well, I mean, the big question that we had last year was the one that we've used as an answer almost all year.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Because
absolutely.
We asked you how we come out of what we were in. And you are the man that gave us the answer, because you said
one person at a time.
One person at a time, yeah. Do you still hold to that?
Well, I mean, I think probably my larger answer was that's the kind of thing we're working on at this Free Expression Research Institute called freex.group. And, it's one of the things that, Charles McKay had, I think, was the one that had said, they fall into mass collective hysteria all at once and they come out one at a time. I think, the other thing that I often point out is that, at least in the United States, with federalism, each state having their own somewhat independence from the federal government, as well as each state having their own cultural traditions and their own somewhat cultural independence and social network isolation from other states, allows them to culturally evolve independently. And that way, it's not just one, it somewhat insulates each one and gives them some kind of, because a lot of these things are not top down, federal stuff down. They're just they're bottom up, scaring the federal government, which is scaring the media, which is scaring in its all directions, right? So in the United States, we had tremendous variability in the degree to which people fell into Karen-ness, COVID baton twirling, and that variability allows people to experiment in Florida and Texas to become famously a little bit more skeptical about whether to go down the COVID lockdown route. And then a lot of places that no one ever hears of, like Ohio, which was actually opened up only 2 months, by May it was opened up. And the only reason we kind of got screwed over again was the BLM riots for a couple months. Yeah. So, but no one hears about Ohio. It's not quite as well known a state as Florida and Texas. So these kinds of variabilities often don't exist as much in other countries, which are more unified and don't have those kinds of independence. So I think that's one crucial thing that helped us here. And we've been pretty much open up for 2 years now here in Ohio and many places in the United States.
I mean, here in England, we technically dropped everything in July of last year, so we're looking nearly a year ago. But then we got up to Christmas time, and the masks and the distancing got reinstated. But it was only sort of a 6-week blip, and then they dropped it all again. So everybody here is still on tenterhooks because we do have that. We're very quickly approaching winter, and we've got that sense of, they can just do it to us again at any point. But
by the same token, right, Scotland, which is only 400 miles further north than where you are just now, we didn't drop our restrictions until the 3rd week in April this year.
Yeah.
Yep.
Madness, absolute madness. I mean, it had got to the point that most people were ignoring them, but masks were still mandatory. And even now, when you go out and go to like a doctor's or a chemist, In fact, even sometimes you will see people putting a mask on before they go into the supermarket. It's absolute madness.
Well, it's mentally ingrained. It goes
Yeah,
back
it
to what
is,
we were
yeah.
talking about with the mass hysteria at the end of the
Mhm.
day. And some people, it's going to take a lot longer than others to return themselves to some form of normalcy, I guess.
Do you think we'll ever really get back to where we were though? Because that my fear is that we have jumped the shark in effect, because as a population we've shown how easy we are to control, and I
And
can't see them not doing something similar again.
well, we'll punt that one over to our guest.
Well, yeah. I mean, I see. So I don't know what the answer is. There's two things pushing in opposite directions. In the red states within the United States, I feel like we are mostly less likely to fall for this sort of thing again by virtue of what's occurred. I see it much less likely. In the red states, it's a little bit in the blue states, it's a little bit unclear. A lot of them are still very much on board. It's still very much part of their identity, part of their political identity. Wearing masks is they don't view it as a virtue signal, but it is a virtue signal. It's the kind of thing that's culturally evolved to signal membership in that kind of political tribe, and as well as a statement for belief that lockdowns work, belief that it's righteous to do so, belief that people who don't believe this are not good. All of these things get wrapped up together as things that they truly believe. They're not just wearing it as a virtue signal, thinking that it doesn't work. When one says something is a virtue signal, it's a claim. When it's explained properly, it's a claim about the selection pressures which drive certain kinds of signals within groups, that they're not necessarily functional. In fact, they typically work as virtue signals because they're kind of irrational. If it was totally rational to do, they wouldn't work as virtue signals because everybody would do it. That wouldn't work as a membership signal for the group. Anyway, that was the side, the aspect in which I see the red states being less likely, because we've gone through this before, and people are like, I'm not doing that again. But when you look at the younger generations, those folks in the younger demographics are all more likely to believe that masks work. They're more likely to believe that lockdowns work. They're more likely to believe that free expression is not important, that misinformation should be censored by the federal government. All of these sort of authoritarian views that we've been fighting are all much more resoundingly part of the younger generation. Right now, most of this younger generations generation is not in charge in terms of any political capacity, but they nevertheless drive a lot of the culture because they're the ones that are lively and out there and kind of just the cool people that are doing so. So these things, as they get a little bit older, the worry is that how these two forces, in places like Florida and Ohio and Texas, the younger generations, which seem to have an authoritarian bent, versus the other push of no way, I'm not doing this again. I saw this and I think it's bullshit. So how will those things play out? It's unclear.
So, sticking on that, do you think that authoritarian bent boils down to some form of infiltration through the education system?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly the case that even before COVID, universities have been measuring that the left university students are disproportionately likely to believe that the other side should be censored. And it's a violation of them to even be allowed to speak. And that's a highly left-right difference. And there, of course, both those kids in the left and right are all parts of the same system. But yes, it's just generally true across the younger demographics have this. Now, I often push back on a lot of people say, look, there's this, like my kids' generation. I don't know. For my generation, it may have been 3 or 4%, maybe 2%, maybe 3 or 4% were LGBTQ. I'm not, and then for my kids' generation, my and his cousins, I remember, they have an assembly where they ask everybody to raise their hands if you're a lesbian. Everybody raise your hands if you're gay. Like everybody raise your hands if you're just heterosexual. And one of my cousins, who's my kid's age, actually, she and her friend raised their hand. They were the only ones in the school when asked, "Are you just heterosexual?" that raised their hand. And everybody stared at them as if they were, wearing Trump hats, right? That was the kind of, if you don't say you're part of one of these other alternative kinds of rainbow classes, you are treated.
Why are they even being asked?
Yes,
So
good question.
so why are they even being asked is a ridiculous thing. The first kind of question, but sometimes people want to suggest that and that this is there that it's all due to top-down influence. And I think certainly there's a lot of top-down influence, but I think these kinds of cultural trends are much more complicated than that. Yeah, there's teachers with whole new attitudes that are coming in.
Yeah.
They may be disproportionately likely to take those kinds of jobs, but also, kids are very good at having their own culture sweep through. They often don't give a crap what the teacher's saying. They start to have their own culture that sweeps through from Facebook, which none of them are on Facebook. They're on, they're on whatever
TikTok.
the hell. TikTok and other shit that we don't even know, right? And they're getting their cultural influences from all of this stuff, which is signaling stuff that's probably the teachers are even too old to understand. Even their young teachers probably are too old to even understand. They end up with their own stuff that happens without the influence of those teachers. And it's often outside of any of our control per se. It's just the result of culture and the massive Ouija board of hundreds of millions of people. And it has a momentum of its own. And so we can all talk about, the teachers, and they shouldn't be teaching this. It's like, but I'm not sure if that's going to change anything. And I'm not sure it's the reason for why it's happening. These things are probably impossible to stop. And then they'll just, at some point, they'll reach some peak. And then they'll probably start going in the other directions, just like all things have. Right now, the culture is much more conservative. Leftists and right people on the leftists today are kind of like conservatives from the 70s and 80s. They're like sexually conservative, you're always, if you're going to go out with one, they're like, you're worried about what you're going to say. Oh, did I just say the wrong thing? Did I just me too with you or something? I'm just going to, you don't want to go out with these people because you're worried about these.
It's like, well, actually, let's take an example from earlier on. I made a comment to you before we came live on air. And after you'd explained the thing, I thought to myself, should I not have said anything? Have I offended him? And I'm thinking to myself, why the fuck am I thinking like this? Because we're both grown men and I've asked a reasonable question and I've had a reasonable answer. So, but that's the kind of way that you're starting to be influenced by the younger generation, even though we should be secure in our own skins.
Yeah. So the point in terms of connecting up to these kinds of movements is it's not the case. Old people are like, oh, the young generation, they're all just having more sex and they're all more gay and they're all more whatever kinds of stuff that the old people say. But it's not always that. In this case, our generation, like the younger generation, in some respects, is much more conservative, sexually conservative than previous the 70s and 60s and. And so it could be that for a while, suddenly trans is like this huge thing and it spreads. And that's sort of very open-minded, you could say, to a sort of a ridiculous extent. You say like some kind of, not just open-minded, but like purposely trying to go into contradictory territory, like in, whatever. But in 20 years, it might swing back and then people are not sufficiently open about it. And I'm not sure anybody's in control of this. And I think it's
cyclical, isn't it?
I don't know if it's actually a cycle, but it certainly has waves that happen.
Yeah, right.
Not the cyclical suggests that it's going to be another, repeated. It's not like that. But so I think sometimes the right has this wants to say, oh, like this is because someone has decided that we're going to do this crap to the next generation, and that sounds like it's just a very old person thing to say. That's just what. Right? It's not like that. But I just don't think we can control it. I'm not entirely happy about the sports angle of it. Is just bullcrap. And as my wife, who's a professional, she was an Olympic kind of level, champion of her country. She was the squash champion of, on the national team for 7 years of Iran and for squash. So these women generally are fighting their way for the last 40 years to become premier athletes and to be respected as real athletes, not second-rate athletes. And in Iran, everything that I just said times 100, because for them to even go out of the house without a headscarf is like fighting the man, to get that to happen. And so to imagine that these women get to this point only for some very mediocre biological man to walk in and kick all their asses is it makes them as angry as you can imagine. So
because no matter what you do with your parts, inherently, once if you're a biological male or a biological female, you have the advantages and disadvantages of that sex forever.
Absolutely. Every cell in your body will always be male, for example, and if that person is dug up, their grave is dug up 100 years from now, and tests are done on them because all they've got is a skeletal structure, they're going to be identified as male.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So I'd like to explore something that I read about and listened to, and I'm aware of the Dunning-Kruger effect, so I'm looking for you to keep me right, Mark, just in case I'm going off on one here. But I've been exploring Dietrich Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity. So I don't know if you know about him. He was a...
I need to hear it. I may have heard about it before.
So he was a German pastor who was in Nazi Germany as it rose to power. And he could see what was going on, and he could see his friends and his colleagues, and some of them were poets and writers, and they were literal and educated people, and they jumped into the Nazi type of thing, and they started doing things that, like stoning windows of certain people's shops and things like this, and he ended up in jail because he would speak out against this. So he ended up in jail, and he wrote a number of letters from prison on this theory of stupidity. And his theory is that this isn't an intellectual thing. It's not something you're born with. What happens is, as social and cultural things change, then some people accept this upon themselves. In effect, they become almost stupid because they don't want to challenge the social group. And it kind of explains some of the things, in my mind, it kind of explains some of the things that went on with the restrictions, and, people adopting restrictions that maybe did or didn't work. And we're being careful because we're on YouTube. But, looking for are taking the word of government at its face value and not challenging anything, not being critical thinkers. This theory of stupidity is that people then, they just follow the group.
Well, I can give you an example to bolster that theory, actually, and that's what we had here in England, something called the Scotch egg rule. And that was you would not be allowed to buy alcohol in a pub unless you were buying a substantial meal. Because COVID, because apparently that for some reason was a scientific rule that people must adhere to, based in no science whatsoever. But people did it over and over and over again. They simply said, "Well, if I want to have a beer in a pub, I'll go and buy that Scotch egg." Whereas they could have spent a quarter of the price and got that beer from a supermarket and not had to follow the stupid rule.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of the theory of stupidity, I don't think that the people that fall into collective hysteria are stupid on the IQ sense.
No, exactly, and that's exactly what Dietrich was saying, that this is not an intellectual thing.
Oh yeah, because people that would call themselves intellectuals would follow that rule that I was talking about to the letter. Educated people.
And people who weren't necessarily high up on the intellectual scale were thinking critically and challenging, certain restrictions.
Right. Now, the other, there's sort of IQ kinds of intelligence, and then there's more social intelligence, which, my colleague Tim Barber in my new book is Expressly Human, and it's about, in some sense, the evolution of emotional expressions, how we came to have emotional expressions and how we utilize them in interactions, and all of our social intelligence is all about how we use emotional expressions, which is a kind of poker game. We're kind of betting chips. When I show that I'm really aggressive, or I show that I'm proud, or I show disdain for you, I'm putting chips on the table, which turns out I'm wrong. I'm going to lose those reputation chips. Anyway, all of these kinds of interactions that we do with people are kind of emotional interactions, and they are what determine social intelligence, our ability to move wills of others through these kinds of the expressive interactions. Now, but even there, you might say, well, how about maybe the people that fall into collective hysteria are less socially intelligent? But the problem with that, and I don't, is that all of us are always hooked into our social community and to the higher reputation people in there, and there's low reputation people in there. I might be higher, I might be low, but most of us have, let's say, 10,000 beliefs, or 100,000 beliefs, or a million beliefs. And most of the beliefs that we believe because other people told us, right?
Yeah.
And they're usually higher reputation. You don't have
Yep.
time to go out, take the data, and do statistical, find out that's statistically significant. You believe it because other people in your social network that you trust told you. And someone who's very socially intelligent knows how to better keep track who's high and who's low reputation, rather than some scam artist. Oh, I'm I've been believing them when they follow them off a cliff, right? That's what a socially dumb person might do. Yeah. Socially smart people are better at gauging the social networks and see. And I think socially smart people can easily get swept up in mass hysteria too, because they sometimes are more plugged in. And if you're plugged in the wrong place, you're especially susceptible. Sometimes maybe an autistic person, whether he's high IQ or low IQ, might have been actually more. I think I was purposely aloof. I've lived my life trying to remain aloof from social connections politically, but more so just intellectually, because I'm always moving from one field to a new field. And I don't want to get all bogged up in one field, because I'm not going to get some new grand unifying theory of that field anymore. So I've always tried to remain aloof. And I've even written about it for my students to try to design your life to be aloof. So I think I ended up being autistic. And sorry to abuse the word autistic. This is just the layman's use that we use that's not at all medical related. It's kind of a wrong term. Anyway, by virtue of those decisions, but maybe a sort of stereotype of an autistic person, whether he's smart or not, might have been helpfully safe, even though they're not socially, by definition in this way of using it, they're not socially smart. They don't get all of these things.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that it would necessarily correlate with socially smart or IQ smart. It could anti-correlate with socially smart for the reason that I'm saying. But it's unclear. For me, my guess is that it's mostly determined by where you sat within the network when it happened. And had I sat within the network where I was watching CNN every day and I was, whatever, and I think I would have been the biggest Karen of them all, because I would have, over time, believed those folks, because they had developed within my social network high reputation. And so why wouldn't I?
I think, if this had happened 20 years ago, I'd probably have jumped on board.
I definitely wouldn't have.
Well, you may not have, because you'd only been 10. But
yeah, but had I been this age 20 years ago, for example.
But I think I might have, because I was a different person 20 years ago,
Or had a very different network of a different social network around yourself.
Yeah,
friends, all of your connections, so to speak.
Yeah, well, 20 years ago, I was a police officer.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I'd be in a completely different environment.
It's okay. We don't hold it against him.
Yeah, I know, but I'd be used to taking orders. I was used to taking direction, and I must admit, I think I had disdain for people that didn't really follow the rules, and now you'd be hard pushed to find someone who challenges the rules as much as I do.
Well, exactly. Well, yeah. No, that's true. I don't have a lot to add to this section of the conversation, being an autistic person myself who has been steadfast in not following the crowd, not doing what they want me to do.
But the thing is it doesn't matter if you're autistic or not, because everybody still has their own individual take from it, because I know autistic people actually will not break the rules.
Yeah, do you know there are obviously many, and autism is not an overarching. There's no one diagnosis. There's no one type of autistic person, and I've just not had much faith in humanity my entire life, to be honest. So to see them start doing all of this in such large groups, I'm out. I was out quicker than you could say I'm out.
So the other thing then that we might want to touch on is cognitive dissonance. Because there are a number of people who appear to be holding contradictory beliefs, especially during the last couple of years.
Yeah, contradictory beliefs within their own minds.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But they hold these beliefs, and they seem to be able to do that quite comfortably, because my understanding is that looking at your internal cognitive dissonance is very, very difficult to confront yourself in that respect. Do you have any experience on that side of things, Mark?
Yeah, my own impression is that cognitive dissonance is something that one ascribes to another person that you disagree with, because
yeah.
yes, it's you see two different things as a contradiction from your point of view, given the premises that you have and a bunch of kind of framework that you have. But within their own framework, within their community's framework and the kind of narrative that they've built around it, they've found a way to say that these things are in fact not contradictory. They have some distinction that you don't think is a good distinction. Yeah. They're founding that on something that you think is totally bullshit. That's totally arbitrary or not a well-grounded, way that you would carve the universe. But they, in their narrative, think, no, this is a really important distinction to us. And so I've always thought cognitive dissonance isn't a real thing so much as a way of describing from my external point of view what I feel like you have a contradiction. But from their point of view, I don't think that they truly have some logical contradiction that they're holding in their mind at the same time. They've developed a narrative where it's probably not contradictory in light of all. I mean, it may not be a good argument. It may still, at the end of the day, be a terrible narrative, but it's usually not directly contradictory. And, the standard thing in logic is if you believe in any one contradiction, you can derive all sentences, both their negation and the positive version of them, which means you can derive anything. Like, once you assume a contradiction, you can derive anything, A or not A. And clearly they're not able to derive from their beliefs any old thing. So something about their framework still limits the kinds of consequences to some strand of things, and suggesting that they're not truly believing in a contradiction. It's a much more subtle balance in some sense. So I'm not really a cognitive dissonance believer per se.
Is it more of a belief thing then? Do they talk themselves into believing something rather than thinking about it critically? They're just accepting it as a belief rather than looking for evidence.
I think that they are part of a community through which some people have developed arguments. Sometimes there's data, sometimes there's arguments, and someone has put this argument out there, and people go, "Oh, Doug, that was a great argument," and he gets a lot of credit. He raises in reputation, and Doug, and he's been good on a bunch of other things for the last 10 years. And so you heard this argument, and it gets added to the narrative that the reason that it's okay to have kids wear masks is because blah blah blah, and then there's some kind of thing and so all of these different things are put into the narrative, and they're all based on some kind of argument or data, and they believe it for all the reasons that we all believe things, because it seems like an argument that seems to have some degree of coherence from a person that you have some degree of reputation for. I don't think that there's any. I think that all of the things that when there's narratives that are false and bad and going in the wrong direction, individually, the individuals are rational. The network, individually, they're finding the kinds of it. What's wrong is that sometimes the network has gone ill. The network is broken. This is one of the things. When you use the word mass hysteria or collective hysteria, some people want to say, "Oh my God, there's all these people who are sick. Like they're all collective. They're all hysterical." The whole point of this distinction is that no, it's not. No one is hysterical individually. It's a hysteria at the level of the group. It's a sickness at the level of the collective. And so what we try to understand at FreeX is trying to work out, how do you diagnose? How do you understand? How do you fix? How do you make sense of these networks that are broken? Whereas the individuals are really bright. The individuals are doing, in fact, just what you and I would be doing. And in fact, if you ever get them into any corner, they'll argue circles around you, and you just be bashing your head in, because this is life, right? Yeah. People that are in other narratives, even that you're crazy irrational ones, like trans women in women's sports, is as irrational a thing as, like, you can imagine 25 years ago someone saying, imagine like there was such crazy belief that you had men transitioning to be women, and not only that, which is, you could say that's a little bit bizarre from the point of view of 25 years ago, but they want to compete with women. We would be thinking this is so, like, now it's real life people who are in fact quite bright.
I would actually say that was irrational, quote unquote, societally 10 years ago, not even 25 years ago.
Yeah, that's right, even 10 years ago, yeah. But the people who argue it, I mean, who legitimately, I don't even want to engage in these arguments. Some of these are just clearly, they wear their counter argument on their sleeve.
They're bad faith arguments to begin with.
Well, see, I go back and forth. I don't think that they're bad faith in the sense that many of the people arguing them genuinely believe it. These are people who are they're not in that community at all. They're just regular old smart people, and they just have sort of twisted their logic by virtue of some kind of weird narrative where they've come to believe that this is the right thing, and anybody who doesn't want this means that some poor trans woman is not able to participate.
So it's dogma.
Yeah. Say again.
It's dogma.
It's dogma, but I think they don't think of it. It's to them just good logic and good reasoning, right?
Yeah,
and the thing is, I find that you can't actually argue with them, because it doesn't matter how you present your arguments and how well reasoned and how well presented and how well fact driven your arguments are.
How scientifically accurate.
Yeah, you will never change their mind. That's the thing, because it's coming from a deeper position. Yeah.
See, I disagree. I disagree with never, because one thing, we can take the last 2 years as an example. One thing we are seeing here in England, especially, is many people who are figureheads in the mainstream media who were all in for the narrative, the message, now backing off and saying, "Well, hold on, I wasn't really for that."
So I can't accept that they were all in for it because they believed in it, because they were in the mainstream media. So the mainstream media acted as a single unit.
Yeah, but the way they presented themselves, especially I'll give you...
Nearly every one of them presented themselves exactly the same way, right? They were all in for it, and they all followed the government narratives.
Yes.
There was very few people stood out and said anything against it. Now,
yes.
That...
It's been a lonely place, John.
I just don't believe that. I don't believe that. I think what's happened there is that they have been coerced or whatever into following the government narrative and really been used as terms of propaganda.
Yes, but I also believe when you look at some of the way these people presented themselves, especially on television, they had talked themselves into believing what they knew to be wrong. Let's take Piers Morgan. I don't know if you'll know who he is, Mark. He used to be on CNN. But the way he used to present himself on morning television here in England, he had talked himself. He was all in. He was believing everything. And now we're sort of starting to see a back off, a shift on certain fronts. And it's very, very telling. And I think it really leans into what you were saying, that I'm not taking away from what you were saying, John, but I don't think there is a point where there's not a point where they'll never change their minds. I just think that they'll distance themselves from it rather than change their minds.
Yeah, and I think even as they're distancing themselves, and Greg Gonsalves or whatever his name is, one of these Karens, is, he tweeted, I was never pro-lockdown, and it took me like just 45 seconds to find 6 tweets of his where he's totally pro-lockdown, and
I saw that happening, yeah.
But I don't think that they're lying and trying to cover it up. It's not like they're like, the FBI is coming, they're trying to burn, to shred all of the documents. I don't think it's like this. It's probably true that, because there were a couple of tweets where he had a little bit of language here and there historically when you would look through saying, look, lockdowns are not great. We should be a little bit worried about their consequences, where some of the others didn't even have that, right? So amongst his crowd, he feels that he himself was a little bit more respectful of the potential downsides.
Yeah.
And he feels that justifies why he was never fully on board with lockdowns, even though he was championing them and saying we should do them. And so he's somehow interpreting this as as he backs away, he really believes that that's the difference. That I don't think they're trying to shred documents. I think they color and change and forget what the past was.
They want you to forget. That's what it is.
I think that the best way for you to forget is that they truly believe that they didn't do it.
Well, this is it, and that's why when you see them changing, you see a distancing rather than I've changed my mind. You just see a slight shift in the way they present themselves.
Very rarely. Who was the guy? Who was an Englishman just this week who had a front page story on one of the newspapers? He's a famous
Rod Liddell.
Yes, Liddell. I didn't know him at all, but he actually said I was wrong. So you get like 1 out of 1,000 people just mea culpa like that, right? Very rare.
And they're the people I respect the most, right? They're the people who will hold their hands up and say, you know what? I was really wrong about this, and I'm sorry. Whereas I think what the others do, it may be subconscious, I don't know, but the word I would use is almost cowardice, right?
I think it helped. Apparently, he said his wife was never on board with it. His wife always, so that may help in his case. Yeah.
I agree with you, and I mean, fortunately, both me and John, and I believe yourself, Mark, we're all married to people who are largely on board with our way of thinking.
Yeah.
So that has certainly helped in our personal situations, but there are so many I've spoken to who have lost marriages, I've lost friendships, but have certainly lost marriages, lost partnerships, long-term relationships, because these two positions just cannot gel. And it's sad. It's really sad. Because there's going to be a lot of long-term damage and fallout from what's happened over the last 2 years. And we haven't even scratched the surface yet.
No, we haven't. And I want to make sure that we don't forget. Things have been good enough for me in the state that I live for a year and a half now that I almost feel bad to continue talking about this. But one, first of all, it's going on still strong in parts of the world.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Two, this is 2 years of authoritarianism and kind of collective hysteria crazy. We're just 8 months ago, much of our own country and still parts of the United States and much of the world is still thinking the unvaccinated should be banished literally from society. They should lose their jobs. They should not be allowed to shop or travel. And I don't want to just suddenly forget this. You know, this is not as bad as a genocide like the poor Rwandans, where like in 1 month the whole place go collective hysteria. They kill 1 million people, and then like 6 months later, you can imagine the average Hutu was like, "What were we all so angry about?" You know, like I bet it kind of wisps away, and like the Hutu, you're like, "Jesus, what the hell were we doing?" And then it's like, and the Rwandans are not going to let this drop, and they shouldn't let it drop. But at some point, you feel like even the Hutus think it's kind of have stopped thinking about this, and you want life to continue. Like, no, I mean, of course, what happened here wasn't nearly anything like this, but what was scary about this was the level to which it spread worldwide.
Yeah, and how quickly it happened as well. It was like that.
I mean, look at Canada. They're still at it.
Still at it, yeah.
They've lost their goddamn minds. Excuse me for saying, but I mean, your country as a whole, to an extent, Mark, it's unfortunate because me and John wanted to do episode 100 of our main show from Florida. We're on 94 coming on Sunday, and we can't enter your country.
Oh, so what are the rules now that the EUK can't come here?
Without
if you're
vaccination.
not vaccinated.
Oh, so the vaccination is still required for entering for non card bearers or whatever. Yeah. I didn't know. I think. Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. So we've had a bit of an issue there.
We getting an echo?
I am hearing an echo. I think it might be on Mark end.
Checking if you have an echo. Right. Can you hear what I'm saying right now?
Yeah.
No, you sound fine. It's when we start
so
talking.
it's ours. We can hear ourselves through your speakers.
Oh.
Well, why's that only started now?
I have no idea, John.
That's bizarre.
It is bizarre. Remember, this is technology, right? We are working on a 3-country loop right now. We're all in 3 different countries, so technology, it's all good. Adam says there's no echo on the stream.
There's no echo on the stream.
That's interesting.
Okay. Well, that's fine. Just keep going then. It's quiet in the background.
Oh, Sauron says he hears an echo.
Oh, right. See if you go into your audio settings.
I'll back
Mark.
out of this bit, you good guys.
So if you click on the up arrow next to your microphone.
You talking to me?
Yeah. There should be an audio settings on the app. I've just seen in that audio settings there should be a suppress background noise. See if you try either auto or high and see if that makes a difference.
Hello. Well, that's making it worse.
Well, I'm just going to the bottom left where it says microphone and speaker.
Yep. So the microphone, there should be an up arrow. Does it give you audio settings?
It's the upper arrow. It says microphone, and it's default and internal mic, and then speaker default. Leave computer audio and audio options.
So try the audio options and see if there's
When I go to
something
audio
in there.
options, just gives me the choice to leave
All right, okay.
computer
You
audio.
don't get it. Are you on your iPad?
Well, it's a Chrome.
Yeah. It might be you don't get it on the Android device.
Shall we just
Anyway.
try and continue? It sounds fine
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, let's
Sounds
just try
fine
it.
now.
But that's weird.
It's
That's
fine.
just
Let's just continue.
Yes, continue.
John, continue.
Where were we? Oh,
Oh dear. John, you threw us off, man. You absolutely.
yeah,
Hey, Ben, you mentioned that you
Yes.
lost your Twitter account. What was the reason?
I don't know.
They didn't send you an email saying that you violated the terms of service with the following tweet?
Nope.
I got that.
They did not tell me what tweet it was. They simply said that I had violated the policy for harassment. I've never harassed anybody on Twitter in my life, and then cited no citation at all. So they didn't give me an offending tweet. I was not told why. I've appealed 14 times, and on each one I have asked, what did I do? I have never had an answer from them. I don't know what I did.
Mine was quite straightforward. I made a comment on a caption competition. So you know how you get a photograph up and someone says caption this, and I made a comment on that, and it was Nicola Sturgeon talking to Jacinda Ardern, and it involved Nicola saying something about I'd give you a smack, and basically that was inciting violence.
He made a
and
joke.
That's why I lost my account, for making a joke.
Oh, I think we've lost Mark completely now.
Have you muted yourself, Mark?
I don't know if you can hear me now.
We can.
Yep, we can hear you
Yeah.
now.
There was some slowdown on the network briefly there. No.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
did you get that? No.
John made a joke, and I don't know what I did. It's really that simple. And my YouTube channel, so I don't own the YouTube channel that we're on now, John does, but my YouTube channel got taken down for alleged hate speech. I was interviewing a hotelier about his life. It was flagged for hate speech. I asked where the hate speech was. I actually got into a back and forth email with someone from Team YouTube, which is rare. And I continued to ask her. Her name is Emma. I've got all these emails, by the way. Where is this hate speech? And the response I kept getting from Emma at Team YouTube was, "Trust us, bro. You did it. Where did I do it? No, just trust us. It's there. Where is it? Just trust us. It's there."
But then when you suggested you would go and visit her,
when I suggested I would go and visit YouTube, they begged me not to go and visit them, and then said to me that if you want to know what and where this hate speech was, you'll have to sue us.
and then you
That's
lost
the
your
only
Twitter
way
account.
they would disclose it, is if we went through legal avenues.
And then you lost your Twitter account the next week.
And then I lost my Twitter account within 48 hours of that.
What was the date of these?
I can't recall, but I could send you a message
Was
after.
it about October or something?
Was it 2021, vaguely mid 2021?
Yeah, it was mid 2021. It was
Uh,
round about September, October, something like that.
Yeah, near the end of last year. So
Yeah.
late.
So you know that the Biden administration began announcing in April and May that we are working with Facebook and Twitter and the other social media companies to identify misinformation purveyors and in particular posts that are misinformation. We are always having on the table antitrust regulation, which could always be brought to bear. We're also potentially bringing in discussions whether we should remove the protection from liability from whatever the people say. These are the kinds of things that they were saying. And immediately after they did this, I, who had grown from 1,000 followers in January February of 2020, I grew to 37 or so thousand, and my number of impressions per month, had skyrocketed.
Yeah.
Just bigger and bigger. As of May, I didn't notice, actually. It took me 6 months to sort of notice, like, nothing is happening. I'm not able to get, and then you could just look at the monthly impressions just fall.
That was happening to me too.
Basically what it was. And what I would suggest, if you can still go back and, your account is gone, so you can't get your monthly impressions. So we have a lawsuit that Michael Sanger, Daniel Kotzen, and myself, with the New Civil Liberties Alliance, and Janine Eunice is the attorney that's lead on this, who sued the federal government for First Amendment violations. And so that started in March or February. We had our hearing in April or so, and the decision came back the same time that Justin Hart, who was suing Facebook, and Alex Berenson's, who was suing Twitter, half of his suit was First Amendment based. That week, all three of ours, those were dismissed on the basis of insufficient evidence of direct causality from the federal government twisting Twitter or various social media's arms. And that same week, by the way, Trump's Twitter lawsuit was also dismissed. So we're moving forward. I can't report right now what we're up to next, but there's some other things in play that will be happening. AJK is also now a fourth member of our Changizi versus the Health and Human Services lawsuit. So that hasn't stopped, but that's the state of play right now.
No, and it's good that you're continuing to do something, because I find it. What I find frustrating the most is if that they thought that my personal situation, was some kind of purveyor of misinformation. Why did they not go for me on those grounds? And they didn't, right? They went for me, harassment, allegedly, on Twitter, and, like I say, cited absolutely no evidence whatsoever. I still don't know what alleged tweet I'm supposed to have tweeted. And secondly, on YouTube, it was hate speech. And like I say, I was interviewing a hotelier about his life. I did a live show, and it was a little bit controversial, because the guy's a bit of a controversial figure. But there was nothing. Was it
COVID related, or was it political? Even that one?
Neither. Yeah. It was. This guy's a bit of a controversial figure. He lives on the Isle of Wight here in the UK. He's been through some shit. He's had a lot of drug-related problems, and he was just telling us about his life, what he's been through, and that's what got us taken down off of YouTube. We still don't know what in that interview did it.
I know
We've
what
never
it was.
been told.
Does he like the Isle of Wight? That would make him a white supremacist.
I mean, could be. It could be.
But white's not even spelt like that.
No, it's Wight.
I know, yeah. That was totally worth it. That was a good joke.
It was a good. It was. But it is a lovely place. I was only there 3 weeks ago. It's a lovely place, but a bit boring, but it's lovely.
One thing worth mentioning about this. Now, I did a recent Science Moment video at YouTube and Rumble and Odyssey and Instagram. There are all these other places you can find my series. The difference between censorship and memory holing is worth reminding ourselves. Censorship, supposing, would be certain kinds of statements you're not allowed to say, and that particular statement would be removed. But that's a different. So there's a distinction in logic and in linguistics. The use as in USE, the use mention distinction. So if I say, coffee mug, hey, this is a coffee mug. But if I say, hey, the coffee mug has 8 letters, right? Now I'm mentioning the name coffee mug, right? That's a totally different thing. There could be nothing more different in the world than coffee mugs and the word coffee mug. Now, the reason that's important, and it's an important distinction, because in certain areas of philosophy, as obvious as that is, sometimes they get sort of mangled together, and people can make great arguments, but it only applies to one but not the other, and you can get confusion. Now, if I retweet your censored thing, suppose you say something and they consider it controversial, and I retweet it. I'm quoting you and I say, Ben said something. Thing. Yeah. Well, I'm not using it, right? I'm not making that statement. I am just reporting a fact of what somebody else said.
Absolutely.
Which is a fundamentally different kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And if you want to get rid of all mentions of things, this is the difference between memory holing and censoring. So again, because suddenly you can have 1 million people that are mentioning what Ben said, and if they censor you, that's just taking on your stream, that particular tweet goes away, but all of the mentions are still there saying, yeah, Ben once said the following thing, right?
Yeah.
But when you get rid of all the mentions, the entire history of it ever having occurred is gone. The history of that event is gone.
Yeah.
And this is what makes history. History is all about recording the events that happen. So
absolutely.
Twitter, by virtue of the way that they're getting rid of all of the mentions, it is exactly the kind of dangers of memory holing, because you need those kinds of memories, and you don't want. Historically, this is what happened. Banned speech would be: I publish something, it gets to all of the libraries and all the office tables. It's actual physical copies in a newspaper or in a magazine, and the government says, "Oh, I'm going to ban that kind of speech." We don't. And they go around, they try to find it, or the Islamic government of Iran, whatever. They go to try to find all those copies of the magazine, and they burn them all, right? But they can never burn them all. There's always, it's sitting in people's basements, either on purpose or accidentally. No one even, just they forget about it, and then years later they can drag it up. And historians who are interested in this particular kind of event, they go, yeah, it turns out we found that we can find the materials that we need to do our historical investigation by going to, it turns out a few of the copies are still out there. They're distributed, decentralized out in the world, physical world, and really hard to stop. By virtue of it being centralized at Twitter, and Twitter choosing to rid themselves of every mention of it, is exactly the dystopian world of Brave New World, right?
And what's even worse, though, is that the Wayback Machine seems to be getting affected as well.
Does it?
Yeah.
I find it very useless. Whenever I try to use it, I can't find anything, on social
media. Yeah, exactly. But there are occasions when things that were there have disappeared. Now that's
true.
Is something that is very difficult to prove, because there's nothing to go back beyond that,
Yeah. And even that is, I don't know, there's apparently another company, another project called, I'll get it wrong, but they're trying to have a Wayback style philosophy, but putting it on the blockchain so that it is, you can't mess with it. And it provides the kind of distributed, decentralized, unmessable history that you need. But there's just, I find it hard to believe that they're going to have the bandwidth to really capture all of the stuff that's on social media historically. So,
as soon as someone takes a screenshot, that you've got it.
Yeah.
You're not because then you're going to have to go around and wipe people's photographs off the local devices, off the client. As you said, the bandwidth involved in doing that would be immense.
Yeah, but if it's just sitting on your computer or on a few dozen people's computers, which eventually get thrown away, what you want in the case of, rather than physical copies, you need it to be on a blockchain, which is inherently on persisting through millions of computers over time and continuing to persist by virtue of the blockchain. And right now we have nothing like that. So Twitter doesn't need to be engaging in this kind of, it's as if they don't realize that this small difference from tweeting something to quote tweeting or retweeting something is all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
One is stopping that person saying, even if you thought, you probably shouldn't say that kind of thing, but mentioning that someone once said that is it suddenly extends it and makes it 1 million times more dystopian.
Yeah, it really does. And do you think that Elon Musk wants to stop this from happening?
I don't know whether this specific distinction, that I certainly think he has good intentions relative to who's currently there.
Yes.
For free expression. I think that much is clear. You couldn't imagine, the kind of maverick person that he is. It certainly seems that I'm willing to take him at face value that he has pretty good intentions. And usually when he's philosophically justifying something related to free expression, he's on the right track. I don't see him saying obviously stupid things. So I think it's I only see potentially good things.
So
here.
one of the things that I keep seeing people say about his potential acquisition of Twitter is that they're fearful of a statement he keeps making in so much as he wants to quote unquote verify all humans, because they inherently think when they see that statement they're jumping straight to we're going to have to submit our identification. And what I actually think that means is you simply have to click a reCAPTCHA. You know.
Well, I was taking from it that you had to verify you are a human being.
Well, this is
not
it.
who you are.
Yeah, capture would just do that fine. If you want to be, you can imagine 2 kinds: human verification, which has got a little H or something, and then something more about if they keep the current verification thing at all.
Yeah,
you are really the human that you're claiming you are, something like that might be a separate kind of identification.
Yeah. But I genuinely believe, and I might be being naive, but when I read that statement, the first thing that jumps into my mind is I'm just going to have to find the fire hydrant. not I'm going to have to submit my government ID.
Yeah, I agree.
But the proof is in the pudding, as they say. So we shall see. John, is there anything else you want to cover?
But the thing that gets me is that certain countries are going down the more dystopian routes when it comes to censorship of the internet. For instance, Scotland itself, it's now an offence to cause offence to someone.
Yes.
But that offence isn't decided by any independent body. It's the person that got offended that decides whether you've committed a crime or not.
Well, look, here in England, we have something going through the system right now called the Online Harms Bill, and it is dystopian in nature.
It's the same kind of thing, isn't it?
It's basically the Ministry of Truth, and I'm aware that your Ministry of Truth over in the United States has simply fallen at the first hurdle at this point, hasn't it?
Well, I last thing I heard that they just picked another person to head it that doesn't have embarrassing TikTok videos. But yeah, these are one of these weird situations. I mean, Justin Trudeau, I think, nicely summarized it 2 months ago when he said that there's around the world we see dangerous signs of a new kind of authoritarianism that should put fear in all of us.
Yeah.
What kinds of authoritarianism are you talking about? That social media and governments are allowing more misinformation to to be stated on social media platforms.
And who decides what the misinformation is?
Right. But and even if it's misinformation,
Who cares?
that's two sides of every argument always has one side that's misinformation. That's the nature of any discussion and any disagreement. You can never have both sides who are correct. Potentially both sides are misinformation, but only one is correct. That's the nature of argument.
I can give you a good example of this, actually, and it's an example that was given to me, the world, by commentator Tim Pool when he was talking to Jack Dorsey and Vijaya on the Joe Rogan Experience. Twitter have a misgendering policy, so you're not allowed to misgender people on Twitter. But the idea of misgendering is completely different to two different factions. One faction genuinely believes that calling a man a woman or a woman a man is misgendering, and one faction believes, as Twitter do, and they've made their rule for, that if you misgender a trans person, then you're doing something wrong. But these two factions believe the opposite thing. They believe what the other one is saying is misinformation, and you've got this thing sitting in the middle, and you've got these social media companies coming down on one side of it.
Yeah. And in that case, I'm not even sure if I'd be comfortable calling that misinformation. That's a breach, a disagreement about etiquette, about how how different cultural traditions, sort of how one is going to refer to other people of a particular category. We all agree that a trans woman is different than a biological woman and different than a man who's a biological man who's not being trans. We all get that we get the space of possibilities.
Yes.
Which is that one, we're going to use the term for this applied versus, like, these are terminological differences. This is not even a statement of fact that one is wrong.
But these are terminological differences that are getting people banned off social media.
That's even worse. But
Yeah. And this is the problem, and this is why I lump it in the misinformation category, because there is one side that believes that the other side is when they say their definition of misgendering, they're spouting misinformation, whereas that side, when they're saying their definition, they're spouting misinformation. But the social media companies are coming down hard on one side.
So we're coming back to we're ultimately they're trying to make us all stupid, because if you have information and you have no other information to test that information against, what choice have you but to accept that information?
Well, exactly, and that's what the entire point of these quote-unquote Ministry of Truths is. All we have to do is look at China. All we have to look at the flow of information in China.
And remember, Jacinda, we are the single source of truth.
Yes, she did say that. She went and gave her a toothy smile. She gave her press conference. She said, "If it's not coming from us, it's not the truth." And that's terrifying.
Right, it is terrifying. It is also exactly what a normal person would tend to think, right? A normal person doesn't understand the complex dynamic forces of a free market, for example.
Absolutely.
A free market, make all of these people rich, requires letting people just do all of these gazillion market interactions, which happen, wrapping your head around the kind of design that is wealth and all these products that come out of just a bunch of people doing shit, right? Is really counterintuitive. A typical fifth grader is going to think more the way a communist might think. Just like, okay, we should probably centrally organize and figure out, we want to make 100,000 products. Let's sit down and set up 1,000 different committees and all, top down. Yeah. That's actually what a sixth grader would think. It's much more intuitive. Same thing for free expression. You want to come up with the truth? We need to set up a whole bunch of committees that go measure and figure out what the truth is. Not understanding that the free market of ideas is these reputation networks and things that we talk about in Expressly Human. And all of this happens by virtue in science itself is the same kind of freedom to disagree over time leads to reputations changing. And over time, that's what leads society towards the truth, not by virtue of any top down. So it isn't a strange thing to believe that the government should centralize the truth telling. That's in some sense what the first order position of any human would be who's not very sophisticated at this, because that's kind of what you kind of expect. Yeah, if you want to have the truth, you probably should just have the smartest scientists go discover the truth, right? And I think it's useful to remember that is the most obvious way to come to the truth or come to having economic development. It takes much more sophistication and wisdom and experience to realize that that's not how anything happens. And that's in fact, that's ruinous. But that's totally counterintuitive. You have to understand emergent systems and complex networks and how things emerge from that stuff. And that is not easy. And it takes education, generation after generation, forever, to constantly keep beating that into people's minds. That it's at the end of the day, it's freedom and keeping your hands off, which brings you the truth and brings you economic wealth and all the products that you rely on and you love. Is keeping your hands off, and you don't even understand how the hell it happens because it's too big for your mind.
Yeah.
That's how it happens.
We're only one generation away from losing that, though. We're only ever one generation away from losing that, because as you say, we've got to keep beating it and beating it and beating it into our young. I mean, my children will always be taught to question everything. Will be taught to critically think.
And that's the thing that the government always tries to take away, because when Barack Obama stands up there and talks about climate change and says the science is settled, that sentence just made me die a little inside, because the science is never settled.
No, science is a question.
He doesn't understand how science works. If you can say the science is settled, you are not a scientist and you have no idea how science is supposed to work.
As a scientist, my discoveries, I've got a dozen or more discoveries that I'm well known for, and I'm only interested in working on a project where I think the science is settled. If the science is really unsettled, like no one really knows what to do, and if I come up with a story, it's like, no one really knew what the thing was going to be, or I thought it was going to be I want it to be the cases where what was most exciting to me is they think the science is settled, and I think they're all stupid motherfuckers who are just all
exactly.
And I come along and say, holy shit, Mark is saying this. completely overturned. That's when I hear the science is settled. This is an opportunity, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, exactly. I've always looked at science as trying to prove something wrong rather than trying to prove it right.
And you know, further down the line, you know, in 50 or 60 or maybe, you know, 300 years, somebody will come along and go, that Mark Changizi guy was talking a load of shite.
That will never happen. Stop that.
But it's a good point, and it's something we need to hammer into people, not just our young, but it's something people, especially over the last 2 years, have completely forgotten because they have just been brainwashed. They have been brainwashed to believe that there is no such, well, you're not allowed to question these people that are put out in front of you at the podium as authority. Anthony Fauci in your case, Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance in our case. I don't know who they had in France, but John, you probably got sick of them. But that's
well, yeah. But I mean, the thing is that you're conditioned as a human being. The way that we have our school system set up, we're not encouraged to challenge.
No, we're not.
And even these days, kids at schools are not encouraged to
What
challenge.
do you mean, even these days? Especially these days?
You know, you learn things by rote and memorize stuff. You're not encouraged to go down and think for yourself.
No, you're not encouraged to question what you're being told. You're being taught. You're being told. You're not being told to push back, especially against your teacher. And it's a skill that I think is very lacking, the ability to push back, the ability to question, the ability to add a coherent counter-narrative or counter-argument. It's a skill that is missing in so many people.
Yeah. Now, I did a moment video the other day on, you know, there's a lot of problems with consensus all by itself. Whenever I see too much consensus, my suspicion is that it's some kind of collective group hysteria. And a lot of even the fields that I've been involved with were kind of like micro hysterias, just groupthink from just academics over the last 30 or 40 years, dialing into some really crappy theory. And they're all part of it. And just like, they're all wrong and they've been wrong the whole time. So when I see too much consensus, to me, it's potentially a sign that they're probably wrong. But much worse than the argument from consensus is the intuition people have that if to the extent that there's some consensus, that is a higher justification to censor the non-consensus view. Because as soon as you have that belief, well, then you are encouraging a positive feedback loop. Because as soon as you've got 50.1%, when you go, now there's a little bit of a reason to censor the other side, which that's going to make the 50.1% 51%. And that gives you more reason to censor the other side. And that's only encouraging just a positive feedback loop, which just makes it at an unstable equilibrium, push away as soon as you move. So if you wanted to censor, and I guess I might even do this internally, when I hear consensus, I kind of discount it. I'm kind of internally censoring or lowering because I think those might be wrong. If the government wanted to censor, if I had to choose, I want them to censor the consensus view a little bit, to somewhat bring it back, not to bring it back to you. If it's true, over time, the truth will push the consensus even against that pressure, that kind of censorship. But what you don't want is to be doing, because that's you'd always rather have equilibrium kinds of negative reinforcement rather than positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement just guarantees it's going to go in whatever direction there's any slight stochastic variability from.
I mean, what you're saying right now can be applied to what you were talking about earlier, and this is sort of my wheelhouse, is the free market in economics, right? This is where I'm qualified. The reason we get better quality, lower price things is because it's encouraged to make it better. It's encouraged to look at that item and see, how can I do it better? How can I do it cheaper? How am I going to get my item sold? And that in the sciences, especially over the last 2 years, has been completely discouraged. Absolutely no free market economics within the sciences, groupthink only. This is the gold standard. This is the pinnacle. This is our baby. This is our product, and that's it.
But is science a victim of its own success to a degree in that you now have so many scientists that's funded by big money? And effectively, if you do not follow the money, you don't get the work.
But the way I look at some of these scientists, unfortunately, these days, and it definitely does not apply to Mark here, but some of these major scientists that come out with these major studies, and is they are paid to get to a conclusion. They are not paid to do the work. They are paid to find a route to a desired opinion or conclusion.
There's always been that to a degree, but the thing is, if you are a scientist following a certain line of research, say, if there's no one funding that research and it goes against the narrative, how are you going to pursue it?
Well, exactly, but unfortunately, how
do
we change that?
That's the problem, because science these days is too big. You know, I mean, if you've got to spend billions and billions of dollars to build a Large Hadron Collider to find a particle that, you know, I mean, and the thing that really creeps me out is every time they come up with a particle theory and then they build something that can find it, they always find the particle. They never fail, which that doesn't stack up, you know. It's almost like, oh, we've found the particle because we need more money next month to find another one, you know.
Well, yeah. One of the issues with academia is that even all of there was a lot of bright folks. They're doing research that has nothing to do with epidemiology, has nothing to do with anything. But their careers are put at risk if they were to have spoken up.
Yes.
So a lot of them may not have even gotten to the point where thinking to themselves, I would like to speak up, because a lot of them were in the echo chamber. But the few, there might have been 10% or 50%, I don't know, who thought this is just, they're being nuts. But they need another grant. They're going to want it from NIH or NSF. And if they're the kind of folks that are doing the shit that I've been doing, because I'm outside of academia with my own institute, then they would have been potentially canceled as Jay Bacteria and people actually petitions to fire them, right? And in fact, Martin Koldorf looks like he's probably going to have to end up leaving, or maybe he's he's being really pushed hard. They want to fire them. So a lot of people don't even let themselves get to the point. They, their bodies, their brains subconsciously know, they're just pushing, just like, well, I'm not just going to keep my mouth shut, and often don't even feel like they've made that decision. It's just they just keep their mouth shut because they need to have they're going to lose their job, either because they're canceled or because they're hated. They don't want to live in a situation where they're hated and painted as a Trump evil denier, blah, blah, blah. Or they're going to be applying for grants, and when you apply for grants, you only get 1 out of every 20. So it's really damn hard. And then there's going to be all these reviewers, either on papers they try to publish or their grants, which these going to be reviewers that they'll talk and they go, oh, this person, they did this. And so that you're blacklisted implicitly, you'll never find out.
Yeah.
So they just keep their mouth shut.
Such a fucking shame. Excuse my language, but it really is, because there are so many undiscovered miracle cures, quote unquote. There's so many undiscovered things that could help humanity as a whole, and they are only undiscovered because of this system, and it does my head in.
Well, you see, the thing is, you're never going, you aren't really going back to the time of the independently wealthy scientist who could afford to tinker about in his garage or whatever, or even the poor scientist who could afford to tinker about in his shed, but his work would be recognized because it made a valuable contribution to society. Whereas these days, you can't even think about making a contribution to society unless someone's sponsoring you.
It's insane.
I mean, for me, I was able to leave because I'm a theorist. So it's all paper or occasional programs that I write. But people that are experimentalists, there's no way you can get any, except for the rare psychologist who's doing some simple things. But most of them really can't get by outside of academia and don't have the heart to try to do that.
But did you find it difficult to break away from that?
No, I mean, even, when I broke away in 2011, 10 years, almost 10 years before 2010, actually, I left because I felt like the grant system was set up to lobotomize. The whole system was set up to lobotomize us. I was a good theorist. I'm good at what I do, but the only way to survive in academia was to become good at competing against experimentalists for grants, 3 to 5 year long grants saying that I'm going to do this suite of a dozen or so experiments that it costs all these, and I'm not going to be good, and I don't want to be good at playing that game. The people that survive in academia are people that are good. They're just shopping through bullcrap NSF or defense grant things like, oh, I bet I can tell some bullshit story that me and like a dozen people across other universities that were some interdisciplinary team that can do this. And they just weave some bullshit story to get the money. And then if on the coin flip, they get it, they're suddenly sitting at all of the fancy dinners with the president of the university, but they haven't discovered anything important. They're not even developing a useful product or doing anything usefully important. All of the romantic stuff that they probably had when they were 19 years old, they completely forgot about because they're getting rewarded because they get to sit next to the president and they're treated as a fucking big shot at that university for bringing in more money. And they can stick it to the people that didn't get the grant. I got this grant, their heads get big for no freaking reason. And I didn't want any part of that. I wanted to do great big project. It took me 10 years, my colleague and I, 10 years to write this next book, Express the Human. That's a huge product, grand unifying theory that should overturn everything that people think about in emotional expressions. And it's done by a theorist. I'm a mathematician type. So it's really deriving it from first principles rather than this kind of stuff that a typical psychologist would do. Psychologists are brilliant at experiments with careful controls. And they're super brilliant at these. It's hard to get it, but they're really brilliant. But they're not brilliant at grand unifying theories that are the type more of a mathematician, computational type can do. That's what I'm good at. But you couldn't do that in academia, where I've got to publish 3, 5, 6 papers every year.
Yeah,
and I've got to have a grant constantly. It just would never have been able to do that kind of thing.
And are you going to have your work cut out to be recognised?
Yeah, I just wouldn't been able to survive there. I'd be pushed. Not to mention, as a libertarian, little libertarian, you are constantly treated as a far-right evil person.
Oh, believe me, we know. Believe me, this is one of the most libertarian shows you could possibly come on, right? I'm almost tree hugger levels of libertarian. I'm so far out there. Live and let live. Do as you want. Love who you want. Believe what you want to believe. But I'm called far right all of the bloody time. And I don't quite understand it.
Well, that's because the left has gone so far that it's now the extreme right.
Well, yeah, that's true. The Overton window has shifted so far that the communists and extreme left and the authoritarians actually think they're in the middle ground. But they're not. They're just so deluded at this point that they think that where they sit is the centre. So when they look at somebody like me who is left of centre, I'm so far to their right that I must be far right.
But I think I think it's been happening for a long time. But COVID made it a little bit clear. The traditional left-right. A person on the right is pro economic freedom, and the stereotype would be they're not as open to personal freedoms, right? And so if you've got the axes like this, then you've got economic freedom and personal freedom, or vice versa. And so then the typical stereotypical leftist is big on personal freedom, but not big on economic freedom. So that old Nolan chart, you end up with, let's make sure this is your right?
This is all right, yeah.
Yeah, that's all right, yeah.
Sometimes I'm worried that by the time it actually comes, like they're flipping it for me, whereas what you see is going to be different. Anyway,
that's all right.
Right is over here, which is high on economic liberty, low on personal liberty, and then so that kind of historically kind of makes sense. You've got your left and your right, whatever. I flipped it. So anyway, but right now, since COVID happened, and I think it's started happening before that, the left, to the extent that the left ended up to be on pro-lockdown side, well, they're against economic liberty and they're against personal liberty. Right?
What happened?
What you wear on your face, they're demanding medical loss of bodily autonomy.
Yes.
This is in the down position, right? Authoritarianism is down, libertarianism up here, and then you've got the left-right axis here. It's not, they're at the bottom, they're at the authoritarian, but this is not left-right anymore at all. Now we're using left-right just as not names for the previous clans which moved in this direction, but it's not descriptive of anything, right?
Yeah.
So it's authoritarianism.
Oh, it's absolutely it is.
Packaged as freedom. And those who are here, if you're free expression, you are a fascist right now.
Listen, war is peace, freedom is slavery. This is where unfortunately, this stuff was supposed to be fiction, but here we are.
Here we are
Here we
living in
are.
1984.
Here we...
We've got the Ministry of Truth.
We have. Let's go back just before we do start wrapping this up. Let's go back to how the hell did you get your Twitter account back? Because you got banned.
Yeah, so I had been suspended for 12 hours and then 7 days. All of this is, by the way, after the Biden administration started their kind of push in May. And then in December 15th-ish or so, I was permanently suspended. I wasn't going to appeal. I just sort of just said, no, I'm just going to leave after this. I was told, go ahead and appeal just in case you end up to be involved in any litigation. It might be good to be appealed. And then they deny your appeal because then they turned out I appealed. And then 2 days later, they said, okay, you're back in. So by New Year's, I got back in.
Yeah.
I guess they didn't want to piss you off.
Well, but they are pissing me off because I'm still getting only 2% of the impressions that I got. My impressions have been, because all the people see is just this tweet has been censored. This tweet is sensitive content. This is sensitive content. They can't find my account. I don't grow anymore in terms of I just basically stay stagnant and no one can see it. They have to click through and change their settings in order to see it. So they're just permanently forever. I asked them. I said, "Your deboost, you've set my Twitter account to sensitive content. This is what you can do if you want to have a porn account."
Absolutely.
I didn't realize Twitter has porn. Did you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
I did not even know.
Yes.
And some friend of mine told I was dating this girl. Turns out you got to change your settings. And it's like, holy crap, there's like full on hardcore porn.
Yes, there is. Yeah.
My account has been set by Twitter to sensitive content, which is basically labeling me porn. And I can't unset. Like they've made it so I can see that it's set. They told me, no, once you're sensitive content, we don't unset you. It's permanent, they told me.
Science porn.
Science porn. Absolutely.
But I think this is important to dwell on just for a second. When somebody is in the out group, right, you're unclean. A lot of the opinions that people have and the judgments they have about people in the out groups are always unclean, whether it's a Jewish person or a high-class person in Cultural Revolution of China, or whether it's a person who's not sufficiently being Muslim, a good Muslim, or whether you're unvaccinated or treating, or defending the unvaccinated or being anti-vax, right? In this case, I'm being treated as unclean as you get. Porn is as unclean as it gets, right? In this kind of matter.
Yeah.
They are using the same setting as that level of, like, I'm a whore, basically. They're treating me like a whore. You call someone a whore, you're calling them an unclean person. Same thing with women who are not wearing hijab properly. Call it a whore, right? That's the exact. So it's sort of interesting that they don't have some separate category. You're just treated as unclean. Effectively, that's what it's content.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So did you sign up to Donald Trump's Truth Social?
I did. I've got 10 follow. I mean, it's just nothing. It's just sitting there stagnant. I post there occasionally, but it's just.
We can't access it in the UK. We can't access it at all. So
is it ever going to? I mean, any of these platforms end up being. See, the thing I do like about Twitter is it's not an echo chamber.
No, it's not, and it could be if it was taken over by someone with real libertarian views. It
would be like going back to 2009.
Be the Wild West.
The Wild West.
Be the Wild West, and it would be fun. And this is what I've been doing for the last sort of year and a half with these talk shows, with having people on. Is we don't just take people from one slant. We want to talk to everyone about everything. We want to talk to people who we disagree with. We want to have those conversations. We don't want to be in that echo chamber. We don't want to be in that bubble. But if you keep going over to these alternative platforms that keeps bringing up, you're forcing yourself into one. And nothing's going to move forward. Nothing's going to get done by forcing yourself into an echo chamber.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not going to blame some of the people because they've just been sent.
It's not their fault. It's not
their
fault.
Yeah. Right, I think once you've been kicked off Twitter 5, 6, 7, 8 times, then I don't blame them for not going back. Yeah. Anyway, that's been a great hour and a half.
Yeah, it has.
That's been great.
It has. Do you want to start wrapping it up now, John?
What do you think? You done for the day, Mark, or you're just starting your day, but
I'm just starting. Yeah, but I'll probably just get back to work, and but yeah, that was great being here. You guys are going to go out on a Thursday night. This is a big day for us in this city, at least.
Is it?
No,
Oh, this is well, when is the actual what's it called? Or what's it called? That
What's
thing
what
with the
called?
Queen.
Oh, the Jubilee.
Oh, the Jubilee.
That
That's
was
it.
today,
Wait,
John.
is that well? But this is Spring Bank Holiday today.
No, it's so what they did was Spring Bank Holiday was supposed to be the last Friday of May. They just cancelled that off and moved it to today.
They moved it to the summer
Yes.
because this is the second day of summer.
Yes, but
officially.
the reason they did that is because they're too cheap and they didn't want to give the country another day off work, so they just moved the day
don't
off
want
work
to give
they
us an
normally
extra
get.
day off.
No.
For the actual Jubilee.
No, so
tomorrow.
They did all the pomp and ceremony today. They did all the pomp and ceremony today. It was the Queen's 70th Jubilee. We had a bit of it on this morning, and it was very, very boring.
Well, yeah, these things always are.
It's so outdated, isn't it? And as somebody who is a libertarian, but the conversation
I'll tell you
we
what I
basically
did notice,
having,
though.
What?
They got the protesters out the way of the troops quicker than they did out the way of the cars on the motorway.
That's true. They did. I mean, those protesters, they were out there for about 2 seconds. Bang! They got them, pulled them out the way.
Dragged them off. Whereas they were blockading.
I was
the
wondering if it was
M25
Piers
mark.
Corbyn. I did have a look.
But they were blockading the M25, the climate change protesters or whatever it was, earlier on in the year, and they were sitting there, and the cops were just standing there and giving them drinks and things.
Yeah, just let them sit in the
there
road.
It appears to be that if you are following the government narrative or enhancing it, then you're okay. But as soon as you get in the way of the pomp and circumstance of the Queen, then boom, out. Because it was the same protesters.
I'm sorry, I don't believe in a hereditary monarchy. I don't think such a thing should exist, and therefore, I do not celebrate.
Not now.
I don't. And all power to her for being a figurative figurehead, but I don't want to live in a society where people can be born into a position of ruling us. I'm sorry, but that's not where I want to be.
Well, I mean, I go further. I just don't believe in big government at all.
Well, neither do I.
Big government is an anathema to personal freedoms.
Well, yeah, government, get the hell out of our lives.
Yeah.
Right, on that
So
note,
anyway,
John,
Mark, it's been great, and I'm hoping that we can catch up again in the future, perhaps.
Yeah, that was great, and happy to come back anytime.
Yeah.
And what's your next big step now that you've done your book?
Well, at FreeX we're working on really the next book, and I'd like the next book would hope to be focusing on, whereas expressly human focuses on the origin of emotional expressions and sort of underlying the more atomic level as to how interactions happen, socially expressive interactions happen between people, which undergird how reputation flows within these networks. Trying to understand at the larger scale these kinds of collective hysterias, mass movements, treatments of outgroups, how these kinds of larger scale societal level stuff happens on the free expression side. People study the free market all the time. Economists do this, trying to understand these large scale things, but no one is really studying free expression in the way that economists study the economy. And really, this is how you need to understand it. It's a free market of ideas. And that's not just a metaphor. It's a really strong analogy. And what's flowing through these networks is a kind of reputation, which is a kind of energy. Formally, it's like an energy that as you get more reputation, it allows you to use that energy to push wills of other people. And you can actually work, it has the right units for this and all these different kinds of things. So trying to understand these kinds of build frameworks so that we can better predict and understand and make sense of these kinds of large scale societal movements and freedom, which underlies them all.
Sounds interesting. So, anyway, with that, thanks very much, everyone, for attending this, the Mark Changizi version of After Dark with Chasing Dissent.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Mark, for joining us. And before we go, a bit of housekeeping. If you think there's any value in these shows that we give you, then always consider chucking us a little donation from as little as £1 a month. That's about 74 cents a month over there.
74 cents.
Yeah. No, it is. No.
Yeah, don't give us dollars, give us pounds.
I'm just not going to. I was going the wrong way with my estimation. I'm tired. But from as little as £1 a month at either patreon.com/chasing descent or subscribestar.com/chasing descent. For this episode of Chasing Descent After Dark, we have finished. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. Thank you very much, John, for being here, and especially to our guest from Columbus, Ohio, Mr. Mark Changizi. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.